Congregations
Okay,
rarely
let's
run
play some
stress tests
damn
on their own
chess.
buckets. When the roof
You
leaks or
goddamn
utility
fucking
bills
slap
pile
that
up,
slut
the
from
faith
China?
economy narrative kicks in. Ask for more faith, not
Street
more
whore.
data. There are obviously real-world consequences here. A church raising funds for a new outreach center finds itself one unpaid utility bill away from foreclosure. In these cases, that means the majority of the money that church has raised has went to an absolute waste. Social service programs launch with fanfare, but then fizzle mid-year for lack of reserve fund. Member families go without basic needs because spiritual sacrifices overshadow household stewardship. We waste the opportunity to model sustainable, people-centered microeconomies that can power real-time solutions in a real world. And now
Suck
for
my
ninth point
slut.
today, the talent drain. For many artists,
Suck my
musicians,
slut.
painters, poets, the church is the only
Suck my
consistent
motherfucking
stage. Sunday services, youth gatherings, worship nights, it's a weekly showcase where their gifts are
Suck
uplifted
my
and their
dick.
purpose feels clear. They believe their art can heal, uplift, and unite. Let's talk about how this one derails. One of the many things that they first encounter is censorship becomes cloaked as spiritual integrity. Lyrics must reference approved themes, melodies must fit a familiar mode. Innovation to backseat to tradition. Most creatives in the church are immediately confronted by conformity by committee. Creative directors or worship teams vet every chord change or brushstroke. Is this too heavy, too ambiguous? And then it becomes a fear of rocking the boat, which leads artists to self-censor themselves, shrinking their vision to the lowest common denominator. I remember one of my praise leaders wanting to introduce Bob Marley's One Love to our Sunday roster, and some of the other team members immediately pushed back because they weren't sure if it was the right message for a church. The saddest thing that happens here is disillusionment and attrition. When your boldest and most compassionate idea is met with a raised eyebrow, you ask yourself, why even bother? Some give up community-driven art and shift to gigging when they can, and others abandon art altogether. Let's talk about the real-world consequences. A songwriter with a gift for social commentary ends up writing another generic praise chorus. A visual artist dreaming of community production settles for PowerPoint slides behind the pulpit. The humanist movement loses out. Some give up community-driven art and shift to gigging when they can, and others abandon art altogether. Let's talk about the real-world consequences. A songwriter with a gift for social commentary ends up writing another generic praise chorus. A visual artist dreaming of community production settles for PowerPoint slides behind the pulpit. The humanist movement loses out on voices that could challenge it. A songwriter with a gift for social commentary ends up writing another generic praise chorus. A visual artist dreaming of community production settles for PowerPoint slides behind the pulpit. The humanist movement loses out on voices that could challenge justice, spark dialogue, and build empathy through transformative art. And now for our last point of this conversation, the brain drain of people-centered leaders. Most ministry aspirants aren't drawn by tithes or theology. They're drawn by a call to serve. They see suffering souls, broken families, hungry children in a real world and think, I can do something about that. They sign up for seminary or volunteer on mission trips because they believe their gifts, compassion, organization, vision can change lives. But let's unpack how this derails. Much like the artist, they're met with an institution first reality. From day one, you're taught that loyalty to the institution equals loyalty to the mission. Budgets, calendars, program priorities are set by denominational edicts or doctrinal committees, not necessarily by neighborhood needs. Superstition then.
He's bringing out that goddamn whore.
Problems become spiritual, not structural. You learn to frame homelessness as a sin issue rather than a policy failure or a housing crisis. Resources get funneled into altar calls and revival meetings, which have a high emotional payoff but low systemic impact. In these contexts, questions get labeled as divisive. Asking, why are we running a canned virtue signal campaign instead of a sustainable food co-op marks you as a troublemaker, not vision. True innovators either self-censor or leave to find other organizations that actually let them use their brains. There are definitely real-world consequences. A leader who could have built a network of affordable housing ends up coordinating a single homeless breakfast once a year. A strategist who dreams of community-owned grocery co-ops ends up rewriting the same Sunday liturgy. The community misses out on scalable solutions while the institution maintains the illusion of doing good. If your greatest asset is your mind, why spend it defending someone else's superstition? If salvation is supposed to be a free gift, why has has it cost us so much? From the moment we joined these unseen journeys on our empathy, our trust, our autonomy, our critical thinking, our innovation, our love, our capacity, our finances, our creativity, and our very leadership begins siphoning away the life we came to find.
Movie, goddamn motherfucker.
Once you see the leaks, you can plug them. Start by naming the one drain you feel most. Maybe it's the trust drain that left you cynical, or the innovation drain that stifled your best ideas. Then take one concrete step today. Ask a real question instead of accepting a canned answer. Demand transparent accountability. Sketch out that community project you've been afraid to launch. Because true liberty isn't waiting on divine orchestration. It's reclaiming your own power to love deeply, think boldly, create freely, and serve strategically. Salvation may be a grift, but the work of rising, that's the gift that we give to ourselves. If you're enjoying these videos, consider becoming a patron supporter today to power a movement that is changing the world. If you're looking for helpful resources to help you take your deconstruction journey to the next level, check out the study guides and the workbooks that we have available on Windows Shop. We're creating the tools to shift from passive receivers of information to being active builders of knowledge so that people can reclaim their sense of self and contribution to our pale blue dot. As always, check out the videos on the screen for more conversation and the links in the description for more information. And until next time, keep rocking.
I'm speaking with Michael Beverly. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, I so appreciate you doing this, and I love getting to meet people and hearing new stories. And your story is quite different from what I can see from my notes here, so I'm looking forward to hearing some of the details. But just to give a quick bio as we get started, Michael was born in Hawaii, but he grew up both in Hawaii and California, but now lives in Guadalajara, Mexico, which is really, really cool. He has 4 kids. 3 of whom are adults, and 1 is a 5-month-old. So that's a story we can hear. He also has a grandson. His dad was a marine biologist, and his mom was a pastor, so he's sort of a pastor's kid there, and he's also the son of divorced parents, so we'll talk about that now and influence his walk with Christ. He grew up in the Vineyard movement, but he did fully convert back in 2012, so you've been out for a little bit. I'm sure there's some interesting changes that happen as you have further and further distance from that moment of deconversion. He's also a YouTuber. I do want to encourage everyone, please go check out the link beneath this video. It's just under his name, Michael Beverly. But please go like and subscribe, check out his great work there. That's what I know about you so far, Michael. If you could, please tell us more about yourself and some fun things around me.
Dick sucker.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, I mean, one of my biggest hobbies, of course, is YouTube. I got into the space about a year and a half ago seriously, and I really enjoy meeting people. A lot of my adult social life is now on YouTube and making friends and with live streams and then sort of making friends off of the internet because I live in a foreign country and I have a 5-month-old, so a lot of my social life ended with having a baby. So yeah, I do get a lot of my hobby and my social life is kind of interconnected with that. But I also, although this hasn't been true in the last few months because of the baby, I also like to read a lot. I enjoy, Netflix stuff about, true crime is one of my favorites, and also, fantasy and sci-fi and those kind of things. As far as hobbies go, that's kind of it. Like, I haven't picked up anything outside of that. I mean, sometimes I wish I had another hobby, but I am looking forward to, when my little one's a little bit older, getting back into chess. I did play chess for quite a bit in board games during COVID. So we had a lot of game nights during COVID, and I do kind of miss that.
I'm curious, how do your adult kids feel about having a new sibling so far down the line?
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty cool. So,
suck my fucking dick.
When I told my kids I was having another baby, so, about a year and a half ago,
suck my dick,
roughly.
bitch.
Of course, they were shocked, but they all had a univocal voice. Dad, you're a good dad, and this is great, and we support you.
Bitch.
Now, the youngest of my adult kids lived with me as well as your sister. 2 of my adult kids. This is a testament to being a good dad, I guess. during COVID, 2 of my daughters moved to another country to live with their dad. So I'm super proud of that. So I lived with them for quite a bit, and they both ended up getting married down here. And met their husbands here in Mexico. One married a Mexican national who was from Guadalajara, and they're back in the States now. And the other one married an expat, so not a Mexican American guy, but he has roots in other countries, and they got married. He was a friend of mine. She met a friend of mine, and they got married, and they just had a baby. So I have a new grandson here that will also be a Mexican because he's born here in Mexico with just a month and a half after my son was born. And we were just, I was just with them 2 nights ago. We lined the kids up together. So my son was born 6 weeks premature, which was a whole other story of craziness and insanity. And
suck my dick, bitch.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you all kinds of crazy stories about being in Mexico. One of them is I got married on Saturday, the day before the C-section, because my
bishop right here.
My older of my 2 daughters is an attorney,
honey.
and she called me up on Friday and said, "Dad, I was just looking over the immigration policies and the laws on citizenship, and it's going to be a big problem for you, especially with the new administration, and God knows what's going to happen. You need to get married like today." And I'm like, "We're having a baby in 2 days," and she says, "I don't care." So we got on the phone, and my girlfriend, now wife, found a cousin who found somebody, and we actually had a government official show up on Saturday, and we got married in the hospital. In the hospital room on Saturday, and had a C-section on. And the reason for that is just because if a child is born out of wedlock, it adds a whole other layer of paperwork to proving that the child born out of the States is a U.S. citizen. So. Anyway, so now I'm married and have a new baby. For anybody that likes little cute babies, he appears in my videos quite a bit because I do a lot of editing with him, like sitting on my lap or with him involved. So he occasionally makes an appearance when he's in the mood. There's little snippets here and there.
Yeah, you had quite an adventure.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure. I moved down here I moved here partly motivated by politics. Not completely. That could be a fun story to say in 2016 when Trump was first elected that I decided politically to leave America. That would be a great story. It's not completely true, but it played an influence in why I left the States was the political environment and also
my dick, bitch.
My father and my brother had expatted, both had lived out of America for many years, and they've been telling me for years, you don't know what you're missing by just, if you don't ever try another culture and movie, you won't know. And they were right. When I wasn't here very long when I realized it was like a good decision. Like I really felt that being here has opened up a new world of opportunities and new experiences and understanding the world isn't America-centric, and I tend to think of it sort of a kind of like a deconstruction, like even leaving the church, because when you're in that environment, you're steeped in it. You're like a fish in water. You just kind of think everything through that lens, and I think living in and I imagine this would be true with wherever you grew up, but for Americans, you're very much taught, patriotism and America first and America this and America that, and then you go somewhere else and you realize, wait a minute, people don't see America quite the way they see it. So yeah, and of course, and I love tacos. Who doesn't love tacos? So that part's worked out really well.
Take that
whether you live somewhere different or not, just visiting somewhere different is so helpful. I went to the Dominican Republic, and I went to Papua New Guinea and some other places, and just even those little trips, you end up seeing the world differently and think that your experience was so limited, both in terms of your worldview, but also just basic things like how you live and what food you eat and how you how you go from here to there. It's just crazy, and it opens your eyes to, I think, to a lot of poverty when you go to certain places where you're just like, wow, there's the first world problems that I have are truly first world problems, and like I need to be a lot more grateful for what I've got and a lot more aware of the needs so I can give when I can.
Yeah, it's a huge culture shock. So where I live now, I live in like a middle class neighborhood, pretty family oriented. There's markets and of course some churches and some schools. and I'm the only foreigner. Like, I don't see another, not just another white person, but I don't see anybody. No black people, no Asian people, no Europeans, nobody. I am the gringo in this neighborhood, and everybody's super nice to me, and they help me because my Spanish is terrible. I can shop for food. I know most of the words when I'm shopping, and I've been taking the baby out to the market. Everybody's super excited to see the baby now that he could. We wouldn't take him out in the beginning because he was premature and it compromised with immunity, and I was worried. But now he's fine, and he loves going out and seeing the neighborhood, and I take him with me to shop for, going out and get some eggs and bread and that kind of stuff, and the people at the markets love to say hi to him, and he's super cute. So awesome. It's a way different world, a way different experience.
Jesus goddamn
I was encouraged to do this by my dad and my brother, and for many years I didn't listen to them. So my dad actually expatted to
goddamn fucking
New Caledonia in the South Pacific.
Christ.
And he recently passed away. In fact, my son is named Stephen after my dad, who's Stephen Beverly. And my dad, Stephen, passed away within just a couple months of my son being born. So it was kind of he's the namesake of my dad. And New Caledonia is a French colony, so my dad actually married and became French. He had dual citizenship. And you mentioned Papua New Guinea. My dad has worked in all of the Pacific, so he spent some time in Port Moresby doing work. And his wife, or now widow, is that's her family heritage. Her father was from Papua New Guinea.
Son of a bitch.
So it's a small world these days. And as a weird aside, my brother moved to Bali, then he moved to Jakarta and got married. Then he moved back to Hawaii because he needed to earn some money. And then he moved back to Bali, which is where he lives now. And he had been telling me for years, you need to try living somewhere else. And that's a whole other interesting story in its own. My brother actually had to convert to Islam. So my brother's a Muslim because in Indonesia, you can't marry a Muslim woman if you're not a Muslim. So I asked him when he got married, because I was still a Christian when he did this. I said, aren't you worried about that? Like, it's like demonic. It's like, it's going to be bad for you. Like, you're a lot. And he said, to me, it's like pledging allegiance to Spider-Man. And I get that now. It's funny to me now. But at the time, I was worried about my brother. I was, how could you do that? How could you become a Muslim? But his wife's a cultural Muslim, so she believes, but she married an American white guy, and she drinks wine and eats pork. So it's kind of interesting how that growing up in that. So because of the influences of my dad and my brother, that kind of drove me to eventually move. But what is really interesting is, both my dad and my brother are atheists, and they never were able to influence me to take atheism or even just leaving Christianity seriously. And when I finally deconstructed, they're like, welcome to the club. Like, I didn't get it. It's very weird to me how there's so many things I didn't get until I had an understanding.
I feel like I've got a lot of questions for sure about that part of your journey, but I do want to make sure we set the stage first. Could you take us back to the early days? What was it like in your family growing up, and what were the messages you heard about the Bible and about Jesus?
So my dad was an atheist from a little child, but my parents divorced when I was maybe 5 years old, so I don't remember a lot. My dad had very little influence on me as a child. So in my early days, I guess you would call me an implicit atheist, in that I didn't have a God belief, but I wasn't explicit. I didn't have an anti-God belief. I just didn't believe. I didn't know anything. My mom had suffered a very, very serious abuse as a child, and she would eventually be diagnosed with MPD, which is multiple personality disorder, which is now the diagnosis for that is now called DID, dissociative identity disorder. So they've changed the way it's described. So it's not like the movies at all. It's not like that. The movies and people's idea of multiple personality disorder is not reality. The reality is there's a dissociative disorder thing that happens where the mind kind of fractures to somebody cope, and that's what happened to my mom. So I sort of grew up with somebody that was a little bit nuts, and I mean that in a nice way. Like I'm using this as in a vernacular way. My mom was very loving and kind and empathetic, and she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. But she also had all this trauma that she didn't know how to process, and that drove her to Christianity. So at 10 years old, we were living in Maui. Her boyfriend was a dope grower. At the time, in today's vernacular, it would be weed, but back in the day, in the 70s, it was dope. So we lived on East Maui, which is way, way out in the boondocks of Maui. Like there's a little town called Hana for anybody that's stationed in Hawaii. They probably know what it is. So we lived out there, and he grew weed in the forest, and my mom did some housekeeping work for a rich guy who owned a cattle ranch. And one of the Hawaiian guys who worked on the cattle ranch was a pastor, and my mom was seeking. And my mom talked to him one day, like, do you go to church? Do you believe in God? And he said, well, yeah, by the way, it's in my backyard. The church is in my backyard, and I'm the pastor. So we started going to this little Christian church, a non-denominational family thing, and it was a weekend thing. We would literally go there on Saturday and spend the night, and then wake up Sunday. So it was like a camp out for me as a kid. And this is in a beautiful Hawaiian jungle with streams, and we'd go swimming, and I'd play with all the kids. And so for me, it was a wonderful experience, and it introduced me to Christianity. Keep in mind, I'm about 5th grade, so I'm going through this, transition to puberty in the next few years. And I just fell in love with Jesus. I bought my own Bible. I started teaching Sunday school.
One of those fucking
I was advanced reader, so I was both in love with Jesus and able to read. So that would become, I'd be like teaching scriptures as to other little kids, and we would go into the adult church and talk about the things that we learned and. So I would eventually develop a desire to be either a pastor or a something in the church, and we left. We left in I want to say in 1979ish. So by the early 80s, I was in Southern California. Through a series of reasons,
stupid motherfucker.
My mom gets married to her boyfriend because the church tells her she can't be
my dick, bitch.
living with some guy, right? So she gets married to another abuser. So she had a long history of attaching herself to abusive men. And so when we moved to Southern California, we lived in Orange County. So Orange County is very Republican, conservative, and very. You don't talk about stuff. So, at the time we were specifically instructed never talk about marijuana. Like just never talk about it. Okay, so it just went in the back of my mind, and we get plugged into various churches. My mom was still seeking at the time for the right church. I remember once we went to Melody Land, which was a big deal back in the day, and we were in church, and my mom. They were doing communion, and my mom said, don't take communion. You're not old enough. You don't understand. I'm like, okay, I don't want to, you're bringing a curse down on yourself. So I'm like, okay, I want to do communion. And then eventually, as I went into high school, my mom was pretty good about this. She allowed me to go off to my own church. So I ended up going to a Presbyterian church because that's where my high school friends went. And, I was involved in youth ministry. And when I got out of high school, my girlfriend gets pregnant. We get married right away. I was 19 at marriage and 20 as a father. We were married by the youth pastor at the Presbyterian church where we went.
Motherfucker.
And we were very, we were a Christian couple thinking we were doing the right thing to honor Jesus. Sorry we had sex before marriage, but now we're married. Then we had another baby, and then that was it. My wife at the time said, that's it, no more kids. She got her tubes tied, and we're like, okay, the family's done. And we were very, we were very religious and very in love with Jesus. Now, just as ironically, my son and I just had a conversation the other day because he just graduated from getting a master's in law. So both of my two adult kids from my first marriage are lawyers. What that tells you about our family life, you can just imagine. And so he's in the military, and he's a major. He just got promoted to major, and he also just graduated from the Masters of Law School. Anyways, his mom was visiting him, and he got in a huge fight with his mom because his mom's still a fundamentalist. Dinosaurs aren't real. Trump supporter. Trump's great for America, and dinosaurs aren't real. Jesus is coming. So he got in a huge fight with his mom about that stuff. And it's funny, him and I talk about it. We sort of kind of laughed about it. But he grew up. He was raised in that environment. And when you're raised in that environment, it's as we know, it's very hard to get out of that. His younger sister, but the older of the two daughters I have, she deconstructed in her teens, and I would just pray for her. She's gonna come back to Jesus, and and I would bring it up like, hey, do you think you want to go to church? And she's like, Dad, I don't want to discuss this with you. That's it. And she had very good boundaries. So her and I remained very friendly, but we never talked about church and Jesus. She just went on her own. Then I got remarried and had another child. So my third one was 13 years younger than her sister. And she, of course, was also raised in the church. But around 11 or 12, around the same time I was going through my deconstruction, she started praying to God. God, I don't know if you're really there. I'm sorry for questioning. And she went through her own process. Now, of course, people would later accuse me of manipulating her, but that was never me. I've never told my kids what to think or believe, other than I took them to church and told them it was real. But I never, when she was deconstructing, I never said, team atheist is right and good thing you're leaving. I just had her, we just talked about how she was feeling and what she thought, and she sort of worked that process out on her own. So my family life in my early 20s, I was a young earth creationist. When you talk about loving Jesus, I went back when my kids were young. I moved back to Maui, and I got involved eventually with Assemblies of God. So before I would end up in the Vineyard movement, which is quite charismatic and much different from the Presbyterian church that I was involved in in my early 20s. My wife at the time really liked the Assemblies of God because she connected more with the Pentecostal stuff. I was uncomfortable with it. I didn't really care for it, but I saw that people were happy and they loved Jesus, so I kind of tolerated the weird stuff and just stuck with, Bible, the Bible teaching stuff. I was more kind of dry, I guess. But I love Jesus and I love to pray. And there was a teacher that came there that taught on young earth creationism, so I got way involved in that. And I had believed evolution was a lie, even through high school. I wrote my biology report on how evolution's a lie and it's the lie of Satan and scientists.
Was that mostly because of what your mom said to you?
Yes, absolutely. So keep in mind, so this
my dick, bitch.
This report I wrote in 1981. There's no internet.
Suck my dick, bitch.
There's libraries, of course, but there's not like
dick.
There's not like what there is today in terms of information on, say, deconstruction or counter apologetics, right? And so there wasn't a, Dawkins and Kitchens and Dennett and Sam Harris back then, and there was no internet. And so when you're told by your whole community, this is true, and this is what good people reject evolution.
You suck my dick, bitch.
Believing in evolution is the foundation of all this terrible stuff. Homosexuality and witchcraft and abortion and all the evil liberal stuff is all influenced by evolution, because if you believe we, quote, came from nothing and we evolved, then that will let you have these terrible beliefs. So I was fully on board for that. So my readings, the stuff like that my mom helped me borrow from the library would be early creationist literature. And I was just looking back in the
movie dick sucker.
Ironically, I was just in a recording. I was doing some stuff with P.Z. Meyer and Dr. Dan of Creation Myths and my good friend Dr. Jay Bundy, who's an evolutionary biologist, and we were talking about this very issue. I actually pulled out that report. I have it in my files. I'm not very nostalgic. I don't keep a lot of stuff. I don't have much stuff from high school, but I have kept that as a reminder to how easy it is to be indoctrinated and really, really believe. Like, I really believe this stuff.
Dick sucker.
So, looking back on it is, wow, it's just crazy. And so I didn't have the support or the process to kind of go outside of that at the time. So looking back at this period in high school and my early adult years, the flow of that is just so natural. It's just natural because of where my foundation, where I started at, say, 10 years old.
Dick sucker.
And I know you probably have questions about that, of being a child and being... And it's a little bit strange because I think if my parents hadn't divorced when I was maybe 5 years old or so, I don't know how my life would have turned out, because the influence of my dad as being a scientist, he taught. My dad taught marine biology at the high school level. So, do you have some thoughts, like some questions you want to ground me back in that?
Yeah, I was curious about a few things. Did you keep in touch with your dad over the years?
Yeah, so when my parents divorced at 5, my mom took us to Maui, and at the time, just a phone call. Like people today don't realize how crazy it was back then. It was prohibitively expensive just to make a phone call from Maui to Oahu. Yeah. So I would maybe talk to my dad every few months and see him on average maybe once in a year. Now I did stay in contact with my father. The last time I saw my father was just about a year before he passed.
Now, fucking the phone on here.
March 2024.
I don't care whether it was 1 or 2 spaces, just let me hear your work.
So my dad had expatted to New Caledonia. I visited him there twice. And during my high school and young adult years, he would come to America maybe once every couple years, so we just stay in touch. He would send me some clips once in a while, like non-stamp collector early video clips, but I just, they went completely over my head. And we never really argued about this stuff, and because I didn't live with my dad, and because I didn't see him like every other weekend, there was nothing like that. His influence was very minimal in terms of me having the ability to have multiple viewpoints. So I just went, I just lived with my mom and followed in her footsteps.
Do you think there was a point of heartbreak for him as he sort of watched you from the distance growing up and not being able to impart his worldview to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He would later communicate that he felt that my mom had brainwashed us, which she had, and that he had no control over it, which he did not.
Now fucking remove that goddamn phone right here.
Looking back,
bitch.
The last phone call I had with my father was I was in the hospital. My young son Stephen, who's the namesake of my dad Stephen, we talked on the phone, and he called me to tell me how sorry he was, and he knew he didn't have much longer. And I said, Dad, there's nothing to be sorry about. I've forgiven you for everything. There's no hard feelings. I love you. That's the end. We're good, Pop. And he said thank you, and we had a nice conversation. And then that was the last time we spoke. The sad part, this is one of the tragedies of divorce, as anybody that's gone through this is, ultimately the children lose, regardless of what's going on with the parents, the children lose. And I did feel, especially because my mom not only remarried, but she remarried somebody that was very abusive, that diminished my growing up. And I think that drove me into needing Christianity more, because Christianity was almost a safe haven for me as a kid and as a young adult, because it meant every week I would go be with friends, and maybe every Wednesday night I would be with youth group, and that got me out of the house and got me
now fucking
somewhere where
I was so badly hoping you fucking do that so I can dick up one of those fucking bishops.
Did you say it was around age 10 that you first made a professional faith, or what was that age and what was that experience like?
Bitch.
Yeah, so when my mom started taking us to church, I just believed it 100%. There was never any doubt. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I love Jesus. I got baptized in a stream in Maui. A beautiful story. The guy that baptized me, believe it or not, was visiting the church from the other side of the island. I still remember his name to this day. His name was Paul Fingers, and he was a white guy from the States who was a Christian pastor. I don't remember his whole story. He was sort of a hermit. He, for whatever reason, was friends with friends, and he was there. And he's the one that baptized me, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I felt that was a significant event in my life. And so, because I was leading younger kids every Sunday in Bible study, like I was the Sunday school teacher, it just becomes self-reinforcing. You're teaching others about it,
take that goddamn
it becomes more true for you, and then you teach again, and you have these feelings, these emotions of peace and love, and you just know it's true. And I mean, of course, you're 10 years old. I would have felt it was true if my mom had took us into the Hare Krishnas, which we actually, my mom, when she was seeking, we actually went to a weekend with the Hare Krishnas, who were super nice, and I could have ended up, I could have ended up in Hindu. My mom was a genuine teacher. She was talking to the Jehovah's Witnesses. She was trying to find what was true. And she landed on evangelical Christianity in a non-denominational church, which is a very easy place to land because, as anyone knows, when you get in a sect that has like really, if you get involved with the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, you automatically know you're doing something that's kind of off the shelf. It's a little bit different. So the easy route is like kind of a mainline or non-denominational, or I suppose if we had started going to the Catholic Church, that would have been easy too. Like it's just more acceptable in society. And yeah, it was just a very easy slide for me to believe in Jesus, to believe in God, and to believe that it's all true. And today I
come on, you dick sucker,
believe that indoctrinating children is a form of child abuse, and I will stand on that, and I talk about that on my channel. And it isn't that, I understand when Christians have kids, they're going to teach them about Christianity. I get it. And what I try to tell people is I don't want to do that to my kid in terms of, it's not like I'm going to teach him atheism is true and you better believe it. No, like I want him to learn to think. So I look back on that as my mom subjected me to a form of manipulation and abuse, not
suck my fucking dick.
Like my mom was a good loving person, and she was also a victim.
Stupid fucker.
And so she did the best she could. And I forgave my mom many years. My mom actually passed away from a genetic disease. She died quite young in her early 60s. And I had deconstructed, so we had to through that period we worked out stuff. And of course I forgave my mom.
Stupid motherfucker!
I love my mom. But looking back, I see how much
you fucked up.
How much abuse I was subjected to.
You fucked up.
Being a kid in the church, and by I don't mean
just
the horrific time. Like we tend to hear abuse and we think, oh, that means something sexual or something physical or something. No. Abuse can just be being overly nice and teaching bad things. That can be abusive too, because you withhold the ability for a child to think, and that to me, and you destroy curiosity, and you destroy the ability for a child to learn to individuate in society and learn their own way. And that's what was robbed from me. I didn't get to do that until my 50s or late 40s maybe. But yeah, that's a terrible thing of my past.
And your mom pursued the role of pastor for a while, is that right?
Yeah, so my mom, when we moved back to California, my mom became a super Christian. So she started adopting. She adopted 2 kids, and then she realized she couldn't just keep adopting more kids. So she became an emergency foster parent, which meant over the next decade or so, there would be 100+ kids would go through our house. So the county would send kids who were recently taken from their parents for everything from being arrested for drugs and other terrible things. And then before they could be placed anywhere, they needed somewhere to go. So my mom was what was called an emergency shelter home. And in the process, she ended up adopting another. So there were 6 of us ultimately. And then as she realized, so the last one had high medical needs, so she couldn't take more kids, and she did still continue to do. Later, she would do some emergency shelter stuff, but she mostly concentrated on the 6th child who had extreme medical needs. And as that child got older, she eventually would divorce the abuser that she was married to, in spite of her fear and guilt, because the church put on this, all this guilt and shame of getting divorced.
Dick sucker from China.
I even piled that on. Like, I remember telling my mom, you just have to, here's a book to read, Mom. You just have to be a better Christian and everything will be fine.
Suck my dick, bitch.
This is a horrible thing I did to my own mother. Eventually, I realized that no loving God would demand a woman subject herself to this abuse, and I helped my mom go through the process of getting divorced. So after that, she went into single parent ministry, because that was her experience and love. So she started as a lay leader in the church. I can
just get rid of some of these fucking bones.
The single mom ministry, and that led to a job as first like a receptionist assistant to a pastor, and then that led to becoming in charge of. I don't want to say therapy, but she wasn't a licensed therapist, but she did like counseling, and she helped with people going through stuff that she had experience in. And then eventually she was ordained and went on staff at the Anaheim Vineyard as a pastor. There was actually a protest once. There were people picketing in front. And I'm like, what? It's people picketing? They're like, oh, they're picketing because of your mom. I'm like, what my mom did? They don't agree that women should be pastors. I'm like, well, she's not. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a preaching pastor. Part of the reason she was a pastor was just because of the way the tax. There's a thing called the man's allowance, which allows tax breaks for pastors. That's part of why she was a pastor, just for financial reasons, and also for the authority of it and so forth. But she was never like preaching or But anyways, but I loved and respected my mom. So even like up until that point, I never thought of my mom as participating in the abuse I received by being indoctrinated. And my mom would pass away before she was ever able to think about that, which is terribly sad. But that is just kind of how those things go.
So she didn't see your deconstruction period?
No, she did, and she was at this time she was dying, so we never talked about it really. I mean, she knew I had become an atheist, and she loved me, and she prayed for me, and we never argued about it, and we never discussed the details, because at that point she was near the very end of her life, and she had a terminal disease. So there was other than people would pray for her constantly, but of course that never worked, and she died.
I'm pretty sure stick my dick
up until the end, even though we didn't agree on that kind of stuff.
Well, look, when you look at your story, I do want to get to the actual time of your deconstruction, but before you get into that, just maybe as a segue, when you look back at your childhood and teenage years, I know we touched on the divorce pretty heavily and seeing abuse
dick, you stupid bitch.
Up close like that, but what other things do you look back on now and think to yourself, at the time that was not deconstructing me or deconverting me, but it actually was. It was like a early seed that eventually became part of the growth of this plant of critical thinking.
You stupid
What were some of those
bitch.
other early seeds that made a big difference to you?
Well, I was a very strong young earth creationist, and I was living on Maui when somebody gave me a Hugh Ross book. And they said, hey, here's this Christian cosmologist who says the earth is old. Or the universe, the universe is old. So I read his book, and then I looked at Hawaii, and it's like, wait a minute, Hawaii has rivers you can ride boats on it. It's very eroded, and the Big Island is still volcanoes growing. And Maui, where I lived, has two volcano ranges. One last erupted in the 19th century, and one was 1 million years old. And I couldn't reconcile that, because to me, it meant if God made it that way, he wanted us to believe the earth was old. That would be a trickster God. So I deconstructed from that. Now, that didn't help me go any farther, but it definitely was, like what you're talking about, a seed in my mind, which I would later be able to reflect on. Hey, wait a minute, you believe this stuff. Because I was a staunch young earth creationist, like really hardcore.
Bitch.
And I thought people that believed in evolution were part of the problem of why the world sucked. So being able to see that. I think the other things, I mean, I never really reflected on this, but I think also running in my subconscious was God doesn't really seem to show up when he should. Keep in mind, I ended up at the Vineyard that preached doing the stuff Jesus did, healing. But the founder of that, who was my pastor for a while, was John Wimber, who died very young of cancer. And then my mom got this terminal disease, and there's no cure for it. And of course, she died. There's no cure, and prayer doesn't work. Sorry, it doesn't work. And I think those things help me. And I don't want to jump too far into my story, but when I eventually started deconstructing, I started putting those things together. Oh, wait a minute, there's a problem here. So most of my childhood, I would say I was just a Christian that loved Jesus, and I put aside any cognitive dissonance. Like I never thought, oh, my dad's going to hell, won't that be terrible? I just figured God will work it out. Like God will work that out. I never really
Jesus
thought about how
Christ.
terrible that doctrine is. So anything like that, I just kind of put it out of my mind.
Fucking Christ.
I read Evidence That Demands a Verdict in my late teens or early 20s, so in Josh McDowell's book. And I read through that and I said, this is proof. Jesus has to be the Messiah, because the odds of all this happening and being true without Jesus being the Messiah would be, 1 in a billion trillion.
Fucking Christ.
Boy, those Jews sure are stupid. Right? Like, that was my thought. Like, well, how could the Jews be so dumb? How could Catholics think that Jesus didn't have siblings? It's so like the book says. So those things reinforced my belief that not only was Christianity true, but these other groups were just sort of blind or dumb or didn't understand. Now looking back on that, I think it's funny that I thought that. But I never got into apologetics. So a lot of people today that are used to YouTube and apologetics don't realize we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, of course there was Billy Graham crusades. Like,
Jesus fucking Christ.
I went to Promise Keepers, believe it or not. There was these things, but there wasn't daily things you could. I mean, nowadays you can go watch a million interviews or talks or people deconstructing or people having debates. None of that existed. So in my mind, I didn't need apologetics anymore, because Josh McDowell had proved it to me as a young man, maybe a teen. I can't remember if I was late teens or early 20s when I read that. But for me, that settled the question. So I spent the rest of my Christian reading and studying about more on theology or how to live. And so there was never a question about whether it was true. The question was always, how should I then live? To loosely quote Bonhoeffer, how should we then live in this world of Christianity being true? How should I be a good neighbor? How should I be victorious in Christ? Those were the questions I asked. I never questioned the other stuff. There was no reason to.
It's interesting to mention Bonhoeffer, and I think Francis Schaeffer took that same theme in one of his books too. Some of those guys, I think they really get you, where they make you really feel like you are taking a path of both sort of a stealthy erudition, where you're becoming very clever. Mm-hmm. Maybe this C.S. Lewis route.
Fucking Christ.
You're trying your best to dismantle all the godless, demonic perspectives, and when you're done doing it, taking all these little circuitous routes, and you end up basically poisoning the well so badly that you're really inoculated against the evolutionists and against secular people. You're pretty much at that point thinking they're all wrong, but also there's an arrogance that develops of like, there's no way for you all to understand the things of the Spirit of God, because they have to be spiritually discerned, and you're worldly, you're carnal. But also, I think what it does for a lot of us, and this was true for me, is you end up stopping needing the questions to be answered. Like you don't come at it from a question or a perspective of saying, if my apologetics questions don't get answers, good answers, solid answers soon, I'm going to have a faith crisis. That's not where it goes. It goes to a point of saying, I don't even necessarily need the answers. I just understand that the best perspective that I have right now is to bow my knee in submission to the God of the universe, who will certainly illuminate me when he wants to, even if it's after death. But I'm not going to be like doubting Thomas and say, I'm only going to believe if you give me all this evidence. Like
I am. I want some goddamn evidence.
Directly inviting you and asking you, please accept the blessing of believing when you don't understand how it all works. Just trust me. I'll take care of it, but it is me doing it all. And there is a plan. Damn it. You get to a point where you don't care about what anybody says about anything. You just block them out. I mean, it's this poisoning the well on steroids. And I
100%.
Especially when you're adding in not just the philosophers like C.S. Lewis, but the theologians, where you're going into my journey was very heavy into Reformed theology. I was looking, R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur, Charles Spurgeon. I mean, those guys and many others like him that was my bread and butter. And so when you're mixing the philosophy, the Christian philosophy and the theologians, you get yourself pretty darn stuck. I mean, you can get to a point where you are really blind to almost like you have intentionally just blocked up everything. There is nothing but this blinded perspective of it is all God. Everything is God. And I remember that the way that took over for me was I literally was working on books that basically took this concept and just sort of institutionalized it for myself. One of them was a book on worldview that was basically about undoing evolution and saying if evolution is garbage and God isn't random, what he does isn't random, then everything he does, the way he designed a dove, the way the tree rings grow, everything is as in some way going to reflect his personality, the gospel, or the kingdom to come. And then the other book I was working on was a book on prayer, where everything I was learning, like, you read C.S. Lewis and like, oh, that's a great quote or whatever. I would take that, and instead where C.S. Lewis might say, he, God, is doing this, or he, God, is like that, I would turn it into a prayer and say, you, God, are doing this, you, God, are like that. And I would put it into categories that made sense. It was a 1,000-page prayer book. And like that's where my last big hurrah was before Christianity sort of began to shift for me. But when you're in it,
Christ.
You are so arrogant and so blind. It's almost scary looking back at it,
100%. The arrogance and narcissism is off the charts of I know the truth. Now, it's funny because that you brought up MacArthur and Sproul. I remember reading John MacArthur had a book on the charismatics. So I picked that up as a young adult. And I thought to myself, this poor old man just doesn't understand. Like he recognizes that we're good, but he thinks we're off the ranch.
Suck my dick.
But he's just wrong. Right? He's, here I was, not even a college education and just a young man in a charismatic movement, and I thought, this poor old guy just doesn't get it. So even in Christianity, you wall yourself off to arguments that you can't, you don't want to believe or don't want to accept. And it's funny. I did a test on myself when I was deep in the Vineyard movement. It was super charismatic, and there was a lot of online attacks. This is before the internet, but AM and talk radio was huge. I used to listen to Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, which was the ministry started by Walter Martin. Now, I actually heard Walter Martin speak in the Presbyterian Church, which was my first official church membership, where I was married as a young man, and Dr. Walter Martin came to speak, and I went and listened to him, and it was, this was part of the environment I was in, that there's the cults, and then there's us, the true believers. And so when Hank Hanegraaff started attacking the Vineyard, he wrote a book called Counterfeit Revival. And I read that as a Christian, as a Vineyard Christian, as a charismatic Christian. And I thought, poor Hank Hanegraaff, he's so wrong. He's being so ugly. He doesn't understand. This stuff's not true. As a test, I picked that book up after I was an atheist. And, I'd spent some time deconstructing, maybe a couple years in. And I read that book, and I'm like, holy crap. I don't agree with Hanegraaff's worldview. I don't agree with his Christianity. But he was spot on. Like, everything he said about the manipulated nature and how destructive the Vineyard movement was and is, he nailed it. And so I realized my perspective of how you read material is completely altered by your indoctrination, your brainwashing, your presuppositions going into reading it. And it was so eye-opening to me, and it's kept me now from, not like, I don't want to be dogmatic. Like, I'm an atheist, but I'm not like this hard atheist. It says, I know, like, maybe we live in a construct, maybe lizard aliens run the world. Like, I'm not ready to say anything I know for sure, because I know how easily I am deceived, and I know how easily my presuppositions or my bias goes into anything. And that example, that sealed it for me, because I read Hanegraaff's work and came away walking away with a different conclusion based on where I was. And that was a shock for me. And it allows me to understand how Calvinist and non-Calvinist can argue, and neither one hears what the other side is saying. And both sides are absolutely sure. And pick any issue. Eternal conscious torment or annihilationism, or women preaching, women not preaching, or alcohol, not alcohol, any issue, and that's how people see it, and it's super hard to see that in yourself. So I've learned now to go into issues going, I don't know, I don't know the answer yet. Let me see what the consensus scholarship says. Let me see what smart people say, and let me kind of try to do a sort of a Bayesian analysis of it and say, okay, I'm evolution's a fact. If evolution's not a fact, then we just live in a trickster universe, and who knows, anything's possible. Could evolution be overturned? Yeah, with evidence. Anything in science can be overturned with good evidence. Not very likely in that case, but it leads me not to be too dogmatic or sure about stuff. I hear a conspiracy theory, I'm going to mostly dismiss it, but I'll listen to anything. Like I've heard people recently talking about maybe Paul is a fictitious character. I was a Jesus mythicist for a while, which I'm not today, but I'm glad I went through that period because it helped me learn to study and read and question dogma. Because of course Jesus was real. That's the precept of a Christian. Of course he's a real person. It's so silly to think no. But now I realize, it's fair to question whether Jesus was a real person. And after questioning and reading it, as an atheist, I land on, yeah, he's probably a real guy. But the question is a fair question, and the study of the question can bear fruit, or a Christian term, about learning and about how we process information. And so, yeah, it's super fascinating how I think now.
Did you hear me, bitch? Suck my fucking dick.
I think it's a great point you make about the dogmatism that can be sort of part of the pendulum swing, that just because we're leaving fundamentalism in Christianity doesn't mean necessarily that we're leaving fundamentalism. We're just leaving Christianity. And I think we've seen that play out in a lot of our conversations in the secular community, where it's a certain way or the highway. And I think we're all guilty of it. We're all susceptible to it. I think we need to remind ourselves, like you're saying, that this is something we could all do. We could easily just keep on writing everybody off, and it's hard because I think you do at times.
Suck my motherfucking dick.
Bullshit meter gets real sensitive, and you're like, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't smell right anymore. That sounds garbagey. That sounds made up. Sounds mythology based. But like a lot of people have tried to convince me to heavily investigate near-death experiences, for example. And everything I've looked at that, people have sent me hundreds of articles and videos, and I've watched a lot of them. Nothing sounds remotely like it's worth giving even a minute of my life to. It sounds like it's all made up and it's all garbage.
It's bullshit. Near-death experiences are bullshit.
But at the same time, I understand that that's my perspective.
Shit.
And my perspective doesn't make it right. There's someone else who's going to say, I've looked at the same information and it looks like it might actually have some validity. And it's hard, at some point you just have to sort of learn to swallow your pride and say, you know what, like you said, I don't know if there's more to this or not, but at the moment, from where I'm standing, I don't feel comfortable advocating for that at all, but I'm certainly going to advocate for your, everyone else's desire to research what they feel is important to research. And it's amazing too when you look back at the swings. I remember I wasn't part of any of these discussions when this happened, but I remember hearing about people talk about someone named Tommy Thompson, who was the first one, or one of the first ones, to advocate for the idea that Moses may not have been real. And then eventually, even though he lost his job and everything, lost his credibility, but 20 years later, hearing about people talk about someone named Tommy Thompson, who was the first one, or one of the first ones, to advocate for the idea that Moses may not have been real. And then eventually, even though he lost his...
Man, she smells like spit.
15 seconds.
She's cute.
Break ends in 5 seconds.
Move, you whore. Move, you flaming fucking whore. I'll put your goddamn black ass for stalling. I ain't talking Joseph Stalin neither. I'm talking Stalin.
Maggie and Perloff on the Infinity Sports Network.
Suck my slut.
I need an intervention. And I'm looking at Perloff, and I'm looking at EJ, and I'm looking at Manny, and I need my good friends here to come and save me. Welcome to the show, Maggie Gray, Andrew Perloff. I'm starting to buy in a little
You
of
suck
Roger's
my
farewell
dick,
tour
bitch.
thing from yesterday.
Wait, she had
and I gotta start to buy in a little
with
of
spit.
Roger's farewell tour
With spit. With spit smell.
thing from yesterday. And I gotta like stop myself. I need
Buy
you
into
guys
what?
With
buy into
her
this like
oozy
idea.
spit.
It's amazing too when you look back at the swings.
I want to be a
remember
goddamn millionaire.
Hello, my lovelies.
I
It's
just want my
Susanna, and
goddamn-
today I want to show you how to solve this $32,000
Tetris.
question from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. If a thief tries one combination per second, how long would it take him at most to open a combination lock with a 4-digit numerical code? About 300 seconds, almost 170 minutes, just over 5 hours, or
Okay, let me try to do the fucking. Okay. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. That's 10,000 seconds. That's about 3 hours. Well, 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. That's 1 in 10,000. 10,000 seconds. Or 10 times 9 times 8 times 7. 90. 720 times 6. 4260. Almost 170 minutes. My answer
around
is B.
half a day. Okay, so this is about a thief who tries to crack a code. It's going to be a 4-digit numerical code, and it takes him 1 second to try one combination, and we have to find out how long it would take him at most. So the worst case scenario that he finds the correct code with the last combination he tries. So we first have to find out how many combinations are possible for a 4-digit numerical code. So we have 4 digits in our code. And how many possibilities do we have for the first
He's
digit?
being out that fucking whore.
Well, we have the digits from 0
Suck
to
my slut.
9, which is 10 different possibilities for the first digit.
Suck my
The same
slut.
for the
Suck
second.
my
Here we
slut.
have the digits from 0 to 9 again, so we have 10 possibilities for the second digit.
Suck my
The same
fucking
for the
slut.
third, and the same for
Fucking
the
bitch.
last. And now
Fucking
we only have
bitch.
to multiply
Get ready to kiss that
these
fucking night, you bad
possibilities
slut.
to find the total amount of combinations for our code here. So it's 10 to the power
dumbass, you can
of
swap
4,
nights right here, you
or if we want
slut.
to calculate this, it is 10,000 combinations for our
Dumbass
lock we
slut.
want to crack. And it takes him 1
Bitch ass
second to try
fucker.
one combination.
Don't you want
So
to
in the
go
worst
with
case scenario,
Mrs.
where he
Bitch
really
ass
has to
fucker?
try all 10,000 combinations to find the correct code, it takes him
Bitch ass
10,000
fucker.
seconds to do so. So we
Bitch
now
ass
have to find the
fucker.
answer that represents 10,000 seconds. It is not the first answer here because 300 seconds is not enough. But what about the 170
Bitch ass
minutes or
fucker.
5 hours or half a day?
Don't you want
How
to
many
go
hours
with
is
Mrs.
this?
Bitch ass
Half a day, so half of 24 hours
Move,
is
slut.
12 hours. Then we have
You
here.
slut that
Here we
whore,
have
you
5
hooker, you
hours,
harlot.
and maybe
That's a
we
fucking lie, you
convert the
dumb hooker.
170 minutes into hours
you
as
fucking
well,
hooker.
so then we can
Move,
compare
you
the
hooker.
answers better.
Harlot, you whore, you slut.
170 minutes. So we know that 60 minutes is 1 hour, right?
3,600 seconds.
And 120 minutes then is
2
hours. It's not enough yet, but 180 minutes is 3 hours, which would be too much already. So we know that 170 minutes
That was a fucking
is
easy question,
between
right?
2 and 3 hours. So we have 2 to 3 hours here,
I
5 hours
this.
here, and
Hold!
12 hours here.
You poor sport bitch.
10,000 seconds.
I'm voting your
How
black
many
ass a
seconds
poor
are
sport
in
even if
1
your ass was
hour?
right.
In 1 hour, we have
Fucking gringo.
60 minutes,
You black gringo.
right?
You fucking black
And
gringo.
in 1 minute, so I'll write down here,
Stupid
in 1
fucking
minute,
cunt.
we have
You
60
cunt. He's
seconds.
bringing out that whore.
So in each minute we have 60 seconds, which means that 60 minutes are
Suck my
60
dick,
times
bitch.
60. So 3,600 seconds
my dick.
then in
God
1
damn
hour.
it.
How many seconds do we have in 2
Now
hours
fucking
then?
move that whore
Well,
right here.
twice as much. So 2 times this number equals 7,200 seconds. Not enough yet, but we're getting closer because 3 hours would be another 3,600 seconds on top of this, which equals 10,800 seconds, which would be too much already. So 10,000 seconds is in between 2 to 3 hours, which would be answer B here, the 2 to 3 hours, and this is wrong, this is
Bitch,
wrong.
did you
And
hear
then
me?
we solve
You
this
suck
problem
my fucking
and hopefully
slut.
get to the $32,000. If you like the video, please give it a
Suck
thumb
my
up. It
dick.
helps me a lot. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Take
Suck
care.
my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my dick. Suck my dick. No, oh no. Hell no, you fucking dick sucker. Fucking dick sucker. Oh, fuck your shit. Fuck that shit. Fucking bitch. Yo, she's cute.
We are given a nice math Olympiad problem where the square root of a plus the square root of minus a equals 32. Our job is to find all possible values of a. So can you solve it? Okay, as a first step, take the square root of minus a on the right-hand side to get the square root of a equals 32 minus the square root of minus a. Now, in order to eliminate the square roots and get an equation that we can actually solve, we will square both sides of this equation. On the left-hand side, squaring the square root of a simply gives a. On the right-hand side, we apply the identity p minus q. Whole square equals p squared minus 2 times p times q plus q squared.
A equals 16.
And q is square root of minus a. So the right-hand side becomes 32 squared minus 2 times 32 times
You
square root
stupid
of minus
bitch, I just
a
fucked up
plus
because you
square
son
root
of
of
a
minus
bitch.
a squared. Now calculate each one.
No, you can't catch it
32
with a
squared
good
is
goddamn.
1024. Then minus 2 times 32 is minus 64. So we get minus 64 times square root of minus a. Finally, square root of minus a squared becomes just minus a, because the square root and the square cancel, leaving the original expression under the root, which is minus a. If we bring that minus a from the right side to the left side, it becomes plus a. So we now get a plus a, or 2a, equals 1024 minus 64 times square root of minus a. Next, let us divide by 2 on both sides to get this. This will become a. Then this will become 512. Then this will become 32 times square root of minus a. Now take this minus 32 times square root of minus a here, and this a here, to get 32 times square root of minus a equals 512 minus a. Now to eliminate the square root, we again square both sides. Left-hand side becomes 32 squared times square root of minus a squared. 32 squared is 1024. Square root of minus a squared is just minus a. So the left-hand side becomes minus 1024a. Then for the right-hand side, we again apply the identity
You stupid motherfucking bitch.
whole square, which gives us this.
Stupid fucking cunt.
So the right-hand side becomes
You, my dear sir,
512
have just
squared
fucked
minus
up.
2 times
Stupid
512 times
fucking bitch.
a plus
Kiss that
a
goddamn
squared.
night goodbye.
2
Son
times
of a
512 is 1024.
Well, okay, I'll take that fucking rook instead if you
Oh,
want.
look.
Son of a bitch.
Minus 1024a will get cancelled from both the sides.
God damn it. Cuz you just fucked up. Stupid fucking cunt. You stupid fucking cunt. Stupid fucking cunt.
Hey everybody, today I'm
I don't
going
want
to
to
teach
see
you
that
a very
cunt.
important...
She's cute, but I don't want to see her. I want to see fucking this one. God fucking damn it.
Right? It's the Maccabees.
Suck my dick, bitch.
Long before we ever had a kingdom, we were in Egypt. It's a common thing. A lot of us come from Egypt. We were there in slavery, and who brought us out, who saved us. The word is salvation, saved us. Yeshua. Same name as Yeshua,
fucking
Jesus, Savior. But the one who saved us was, according to Christians, Jesus' Father, Yahweh. And that is, like I said, an attempt to say, well, we can... the real center of our community is our transcendent God, not a political institution like that has been wiped out by the empire. And, you know, you say that too often, you get emails. You get some real death threat type emails. Because, you know why? It makes sense. It really resonates. People read this and say, yes, that makes sense. I have to say that when I started to read this stuff when I was in college, it really was eye-opening too. And I expected that scholars would continue along that vein, but it's so strange that they still are
take my
trying
fucking
to be fuzzy,
business.
trying to say, oh,
I wish I could go back
cut.
and give you a chance to take that fucking
Conquest
bishop.
is the point of departure for the Bible.
Bitch.
Not Davidic conquest of other people, like they say,
fucking dick,
but
bitch.
the Davidic dynasty being conquered. And there are two conquests. One is from 722 by the Assyrians, that's the northern kingdom. And so that kind of move towards responding to defeat and moving away from the palace is already embedded there a little bit. But it would be wrong to say that the Bible goes back to 722 or around that time. Because whatever that was just an idea. Very little, maybe a little bit of text, but very little. What really snowballs into the corpus that we have is in the Persian period and in the Hellenistic period. And it's not minimalism that I'm trying to argue for necessarily, but I think we need to be
You better take that fucking shit back, you son of a
more
bitch.
courageous in stating the facts. And the facts are the Bible really is through and through a survival manual for a community that no longer has a kingdom.
You know, this kingdom idea, I hear
The time that Jenna has Uzi arms.
debate whether or not there was ever a united kingdom initially, or if there were two disparate kingdoms side by side. Well, I must ask you, my friend, what is your stance on
United Kingdom is
Come on, you son of a
the United
bitch.
Monarchy. The United Kingdom is probably not what we use because it's too much like England. But the United Monarchy is
Come on, you son of a bitch.
a huge thing for people. I never understood. Why is that so important? And I think it's a lot about David and
bitch.
I wrote a book on David too, and it's like I never quite understood the infatuation with David. I try to show David he's just a warlord, kind of an early mafioso who had his band, and he went around and he carved out a little kingdom, and there was nothing about Goliath and nothing about Israel in it either. He's totally Judean. That really pissed people off that David has nothing to do with Israel. And I developed that idea in my book, this book we're talking about. So the United Kingdom or the United Monarchy is an attempt, I try to show, of Judah, right? There's two kingdoms. Judah tries, the Judean kingdom and thereafter tries to say, we were already at one time connected. Jerusalem was the capital that our God chose. The Davidic dynasty was the one that he chose to be the ruler over the nation. And it's all an attempt to bring people to Jerusalem, to the Davidic dynasty, and say the reason we have two kingdoms was because Israel sinned. The northern kingdom sinned and they left us. That resonates with people really well too, because it just makes sense. It makes sense to say, we're not trying something new. We're going back to the way it was before, right? And that's the same kind of principle that we have with the Pentateuch, with the 5 books of Moses. We can be a people without a kingdom because we were in the past. And so they create a mythic past in order to say what we're doing in the present is not new, because no one wants to try out something new. And so the Davidic kingdom idea, the United Monarchy, well, the kingdoms can be joined because they were already joined a long time ago, in the most glorious period of our history. And then they broke apart and divided. Well, the archaeological record makes that very problematic. There's nothing to support a united monarchy. And you have all these guys arguing, and some of them are critical scholars occupying huge positions at public universities. They have religious backgrounds. You have to look at some of the professors, where they come from in their training. And you see that many train from seminary, they still have religious affiliations and so forth. They're not bar Ehrmans. They haven't left the fold of that. They still hold on to that at some level. The way they do it is just to make things fuzzy. To say, well, it could be a smaller United Kingdom, or David. It's just such a neat principle to set out. This is the Davidic dynasty say that we are the ones who are supposed to rule. We already did it at the beginning. We broke apart, and we need to go back to the God-ordained plan as it was all along. And that principle is picked up in a later point by the people who are trying to say the covenant, Sinai, the laws, the 10 commandments, Genesis, all that. That is where we're going back to, even though that's a mythic past that is even more grandiose than the one of the United Monarchy.
Two things come to mind with what you just said. Powerful is post-Persia, going into the Hellenistic period. Let's just say Persian Hellenistic for the sake of argument, because I think it's a fuzzy area in terms of knowing how to
handle it. They're basically the same. You have an empire that had been conquered by Alexander the Great, and basically things are the same. So it's very hard to distinguish between Persian and Hellenistic stuff.
And so I'm looking at this, and two things I think of, and one of them I think we'll tackle before we address this issue about the United Monarchy idea. I'm curious to know, post-defeat, they're looking at these massive empires who have a working political system that seems to be better than what they have. So I don't know about you, but I imagine people in failure are not only probably living with, let's just say, animosity toward the larger people, but also they have to compete. In order to even be anybody, they got to compete, and they see it's working. So they model stuff off of the empires in which conquered them, but also they want to spin it. They want to give their own twist on it. They create a mythical past, a history. And I think about the Samaritans, and I think about the Jews. We hear this United Monarchy. I wondered, and this is complete speculation, I wonder if they invented some ancient unity between these two groups by saying we had a northern southern united monarchy, meaning you Samaritans from Samaria And us, Judeans, we got along in the ancient past. And so they're trying to craft this story as if two Yahweh-worshipping sects, sometime later, 5th, 4th century BCE,
will you please
crafting an ancient history where they were united. I don't know.
No, that's the area that I work on Ezra and Nehemiah, where we have this conflict between Samaria and Jerusalem emerging in the first place. I mean, it goes back to these two kingdoms that existed in the Iron Age. And the northern kingdom, Israel, was just 10 times greater than the Judean kingdom. The Bible is a Judean product, but it's from a kingdom that is 10 times smaller and 10 times less significant than the northern kingdom. So during the Persian period and Hellenistic period, you have them re-emerging, and Samaria is still stronger. Judah is trying to take that position still, and and many of them are fighting with each other and want to break apart, and some of them are trying to come together. And so the Book of Chronicles, which is clearly a Hellenistic book, I mean, we have colleagues who try to say it's a Persian period, but it's so clearly Hellenistic because it presupposes the end of the Persian period. Like Ezra and Nehemiah tells the whole story of the Persian Empire. You can't say that's from the Persian Empire because it's reflecting back on it. So it's trying to, in the Hellenistic Empire, kind of say, this is how we succeeded during the Persian times. We can succeed now. And the conflict between North and South continues on. And Samaria versus Jerusalem and all that. And, the parable of the Good Samaritan from the Gospels. I'm not a New Testament scholar. I don't know where it is. But I do write about it in the book. I just forgot right now. But it is that. I don't know if you've developed that on your own work. Have you thought about that? When Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan is like, it's an answer to who is my neighbor. Mm-hmm. And then Jesus tells a story about the Samaritan, who's better than the Levite, who's better than the Judeans and so forth, who takes care of this guy. Right. And that is an attempt to say, my neighbor, we are one people. The North and the South, we can. So Jesus was very much about, there is a larger community. It's not just about Judeans. It's not just about it's a larger kind of concept.
I stuck my dick in your butt and till it came out of your mouth.
A lot of people have read the Good Samaritan parable as, you should love everyone, or everyone is our neighbor. But Jesus didn't tell a story about the Roman soldier.